Patrick Day, collapsing after a devastating right hook to Maxim Dadashev, whose trainer pleaded with him to stop as his body was already shutting down.
I'm going to stop the fight. Max, I'm going to stop it.
To Daniel Aguillon, who suffered fatal head trauma in front of his hometown crowd. In this video, we are looking at 15 boxers who tragically lost their lives in the ring. Patrick Day, 2019. Our first story takes us to October 2019, a month that would become one of the darkest periods in modern boxing history. Patrick Day, a 27-year-old super welterweight from Freeport, New York, stepped into the ring at the Wintrust Arena in Chicago to face Charles Conwell in what should have been another step forward in his promising career. Day was known throughout the boxing community for his dedication to the sport, his quiet determination, and his unwavering dreams of becoming a world champion. He had compiled a respectable professional record and was considered a legitimate contender in his division, someone who had worked his way up through the ranks with hard-fought victories and impressive performances. The fight itself was competitive but increasingly concerning from the early rounds. Conwell, a hard-hitting prospect with devastating power in both hands, was landing with increasing frequency and authority as the bout progressed. By the time the 8th round came around, Day had absorbed significant punishment, though he continued to fight with the heart of a true warrior. Then came the moment that would alter multiple lives forever. A devastating right hook from Conwell sent Day crashing to the canvas, his body going limp as he hit the mat. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos, with ringside physicians rushing to attend to the fallen fighter as the crowd fell into stunned silence. Patrick Day died at the age of 27 from traumatic brain injuries sustained in the fight, marking him as the 4th boxer to die from ring injuries in 2019. A year that would become infamous in boxing circles for its tragic toll. He was rushed to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where he underwent emergency brain surgery. But despite the best efforts of medical professionals, Day never regained consciousness. 4 days after the fight, surrounded by his devastated family, Patrick Day passed away. Charles Conwell, who was just 21 years old at the time, was absolutely destroyed by the outcome. The young fighter wrote an apologetic letter expressing his grief and struggled immensely with the psychological aftermath. Social media erupted with tributes, including posts noting boxer Patrick Day dead at 27 from brain injuries, as the boxing world came together to mourn. While the boxing world was still mourning Patrick Day's passing, the tragic reality was that his death had been preceded by 2 other devastating losses just months earlier in that cursed year of 2019. Maxim Dadashev, 2019. Just months before Patrick Day's tragic death, the boxing world was already reeling from another devastating loss. Maxim Dadashev, a 28-year-old Russian light welterweight with an unblemished professional record of 13-0, entered the ring at the MGM National Harbor in Maryland on July 19, 2019, to face Puerto Rican fighter Subriel Matias. Dadashev was known for his technical skills, his relentless work ethic in the gym, and his dreams of bringing glory to Russian boxing on the world stage. He had relocated all the way to California to train under the legendary Buddy McGirt, and everything seemed to be falling into place for the rising contender. But from the opening bell, it became clear that this would be no showcase. Matias came out aggressively, landing heavy shots that began to take their toll on Dadashev as the rounds accumulated. By the middle rounds, the Russian fighter was visibly struggling, his face swelling dramatically and his movements becoming increasingly labored. The punishment was relentless and brutal, and those watching ringside could sense something was terribly wrong. Then, in one of the most poignant and heartbreaking moments in boxing history, trainer Buddy McGirt made the agonizing decision to stop the fight after the 11th round, telling his fighter with tears in his eyes, "I'm gonna stop it, Max.
I'm going to stop the fight. Max, I'm going to stop it. Max, you're getting hit too much. You're getting hit too much, Max. Please, Max, please, let me do this, okay? Okay? Look at me. Please.
McGirt's decision to stop the fight was made out of pure concern for his fighter's well-being. But tragically, it came too late to prevent the worst outcome. As Dadashev left the ring, he collapsed and had to be helped to the back by multiple cornermen. He was rushed to Prince George's Hospital Center in Cheverly, Maryland, where doctors discovered he had suffered severe brain swelling. Emergency brain surgery was performed to remove a blood clot, but despite these heroic efforts, Maxim Dadashev died 4 days later on July 23, 2019. The World Boxing Council posted tributes reading "Rip Maxim Dadashev," and an investigation was opened into the circumstances. Online discussions highlighted concerns about dehydration risks in boxing. Buddy McGirt, a man who had seen everything investing in boxing over his long career, was devastated. His decision to stop the fight forever haunting him despite making the right call. The death of Maxim Dadashev was devastating enough on its own, but incredibly, the boxing community would have to endure yet another heartbreaking loss within just days of losing the Russian fighter. Hugo Santillan, 2019. If two deaths in 2019 weren't enough to shake the boxing world to its core, a third tragedy within days would cement this year as one of the darkest in the sport's modern history. Hugo Santillan, a 23-year-old Argentine lightweight, stepped into the ring on July 20, 2019, in his hometown of Buenos Aires to face Eduardo Abreu in what was billed as a competitive matchup between two hungry prospects. Santillan was young, ambitious, and eager to make his mark in the sport he loved with every fiber of his being. He came from humble beginnings and saw boxing as his path to a better life for himself and his family, who had sacrificed so much to support his dreams. The fight itself went the full 10-round distance and was declared a draw, with both fighters giving everything they had in the ring. Santillan appeared to be in good spirits immediately after the final bell, even celebrating what he considered a solid performance against a tough opponent who had pushed him to his limits. But within minutes of leaving the ring, something went terribly wrong. Santillan collapsed after the draw was announced, and panic immediately set in among those present. He was rushed to Hospital San Felipe, where doctors discovered he was suffering from brain swelling and kidney failure. Despite emergency medical intervention and round-the-clock care, Hugo Santillan passed away just 5 days later, on July 25, 2019, becoming the second boxer to die in just a matter of days, following Maxim Dadashev's death just 2 days prior. The World Boxing Council posted "R.I.P. Hugo Santillan" as the boxing community struggled to process the rapid succession of tragedies. The fact that Santillan had appeared fine immediately after the fight, only to collapse minutes later, raised serious questions about post-fight monitoring protocols and the insidious nature of brain injuries. These 3 deaths in 2019 echoed tragedies from boxing's past, none more significant than a 1982 fight that would fundamentally change the sport's rules forever. Kim Duk-Koo, 1982. Traveling back in time to 1982, we encounter one of the most infamous and consequential tragedies in boxing history, a fight that would forever change the sport's rules and regulations in ways that still affect boxing today. Kim Duk-Koo was a 23-year-old South Korean lightweight contender who had earned his shot at the WBA lightweight championship held by the charismatic American fighter Ray Boom Boom Mancini. The fight took place on November 13, 1982, at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, and it was broadcast live on CBS, ensuring that millions would witness what unfolded. Kim came into the fight as a significant underdog, but he was determined to prove that Asian fighters could compete at the highest levels of boxing. The fight itself was an absolute war from the opening bell, with neither man willing to give an inch. Both men traded brutal punches for 14 grueling rounds, with neither willing to take a backward step despite the accumulating damage. Kim showed incredible heart and determination that amazed everyone watching, repeatedly rising from knockdowns and continuing to press forward despite absorbing tremendous punishment that would have stopped lesser fighters. But in the 14th round, Mancini landed a devastating right hand that sent Kim crashing to the canvas. He was counted out, and Mancini retained his title, but the celebration would be short-lived. Kim Duk-Koo collapsed shortly after the fight, and it became clear that something was catastrophically wrong. Kim was rushed to Desert Springs Hospital, where emergency brain surgery was performed to address a subdural hematoma, a blood clot on the brain. Despite the surgery, Kim never regained consciousness and died 4 days later on November 17, 1982. The tragedy sent shockwaves throughout the boxing world and led to immediate changes. Title fights were reduced from 15 rounds to 12 rounds as a direct result of Kim's death. But the tragedy didn't end with Kim's death. His mother, overcome with grief, committed suicide 3 months later. The referee of the fight, Richard Green, took his own life the following year, and Ray Mancini, despite being blameless, was haunted by the fight for the rest of his life, carrying the weight of Kim's death even though he had done nothing wrong. While Kim Duk-Koo's death led to crucial rule changes in the 1980s, another tragedy 2 decades earlier had already sparked intense national debate about boxing's very existence. Benny Kid Paret, 1962. Some boxing tragedies become defining moments not just for the sport, but for society's relationship with violence and entertainment. The death of Benny Kid Parade in 1962 was one such moment, a tragedy broadcast live on national television that sparked intense debates about the morality of boxing itself. Parrott was a 24-year-old Cuban welterweight who had captured the world championship and was known for his aggressive, fan-friendly fighting style that made him a favorite among boxing enthusiasts. On March 24, 1962, he stepped into Madison Square Garden to defend his title against Emil Griffith, what was their third meeting, with each man having won one of their previous encounters. The build-up to the fight had been tense and deeply personal. Before the match, Benny Parrott teased his opponent, making comments that were interpreted as homophobic slurs against Griffith, questioning his masculinity in ways that deeply offended and angered the challenger. When the two men finally met in the ring, there was a palpable sense that this would be more than just a boxing match. It would be intensely personal. And indeed, from the opening rounds, both men fought with unusual intensity and raw emotion that was evident to everyone watching. The fight reached its horrific climax in the 12th round, when Griffith trapped Parrott against the ropes and unleashed a barrage of punches that has become one of the most disturbing sequences in sports history. 29 unanswered punches rained down on Parrott's defenseless head as referee Ruby Goldstein appeared frozen, unable or unwilling to intervene. By the time the assault was finally stopped, Parrott was unconscious on his feet, held up only by the ropes. He collapsed to the canvas and was immediately carried out on a stretcher. The Cuban fighter underwent emergency brain surgery but never regained consciousness, dying 10 days later from severe brain injuries. The fight was broadcast live on ABC's Fight of the Week, meaning millions of Americans watched in real time as a man was essentially beaten to death. The public outcry was immediate and intense, with many calling for boxing to be banned entirely. Live television broadcasts of boxing were temporarily suspended in the aftermath. Emil Griffith was devastated by what had happened, later saying he never meant to kill Parrott and that he carried the guilt for the rest of his life. The E.T. Parrott tragedy was still fresh in the public's mind when, just 1 year later, another death would inspire one of music's most haunting tributes to boxing's fallen fighters. Davey Moore, 1963. Just 1 year after the Benny Parrott tragedy, boxing claimed another life in circumstances that would inspire one of the most famous songs about the sport ever written. Davey Moore was a 29-year-old featherweight champion from Springfield, Ohio, known for his slick boxing skills and ring intelligence that had carried him to the top of his division. On March 21, 1963, he defended his title against Cuban challenger Sugar Ramos at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles before a crowd of over 26,000 fans. Moore had been a dominant champion, and most expected him to successfully defend his title once again against the Cuban challenger. The fight was competitive through the early rounds, with both men having their moments of success and neither able to establish clear dominance. But in the 10th round, Moore was caught by a hard punch that sent him backward into the ropes with tremendous force. The way he fell was awkward and concerning, his head snapping back and striking the bottom rope with tremendous force that made a sickening sound. He managed to get back to his feet and survive the round, but when he returned to his corner, it was clear something was seriously wrong. He collapsed in his corner between rounds and never regained consciousness. Doctors later determined that Moore had suffered a brainstem injury. Davey Moore died 2 days later on March 23, 1963, and his death sparked another round of intense scrutiny of boxing's safety measures. The tragedy was so impactful that legendary folk singer Bob Dylan wrote a song called "Who Killed Davey Moore," in which he questioned whether blame should be placed on the referee, the crowd, the gamblers, or the system itself. The delayed nature of his collapse, occurring between rounds rather than immediately after being hit, highlighted how insidious and unpredictable brain injuries can be. Moore's death, coming so soon after Parrot's, intensified calls for reform and forced boxing authorities to confront the sport's inherent dangers. Moore's death in 1963 continued a grim pattern, but we must travel back nearly 2 decades earlier to 1980 to examine another tragedy that shook the boxing world to its core. Johnny Owen, 1980. Johnny Owen was known as the Merthyr Matchstick because of his extremely thin frame and his hometown of Merthyr Tydfil in Wales. Despite his frail appearance, Owen possessed incredible heart, determination, and boxing skills that had carried him to the top of the bantamweight division. On September 19, 1980, the 24-year-old Welshman traveled to Los Angeles to challenge WBC bantamweight champion Lupe Pintor of Mexico for the world title in what was supposed to be the crowning moment of his career. Owen had dreamed of becoming world champion since he was a young boy. And now, he finally had his shot on the biggest stage. The fight was brutal from the opening bell, with the hard-hitting Pintor landing heavy shots throughout the contest. Owen showed tremendous courage and skill, but he was clearly taking severe punishment from the powerful Mexican champion who was landing his best shots repeatedly. In the 12th round, Pintor landed a devastating combination that sent Owen crashing to the canvas, his thin frame crumpling under the impact. He was counted out, but more importantly, he was clearly in serious medical distress as he lay motionless on the canvas. Owen was rushed to California Hospital Medical Center, where doctors discovered he had suffered a severe brain injury. He fell into a coma and never regained consciousness, spending 7 weeks in a coma before passing away on November 4, 1980. Adding insult to tragedy, the crowd threw objects at Owen as he lay unconscious, showing a callous disregard for human life. Online tributes have noted the tragic tale of Johnny Owen, with users praising his endurance and condemning the post-fight crowd behavior. His death shocked the British boxing community and led to renewed calls for better safety measures and medical protocols. Owen's death in 1980 was mourned across the Atlantic, but as the century turned, American boxing would face its own series of devastating losses, beginning with a 1999 tragedy. Randy Carver, 1999. On November 10, 1999, Randy Carver stepped into the ring in Inglewood, California to face Kabari Salem in what would tragically be his final fight. Carver was a journeyman fighter who had competed at various levels throughout his career, always giving his best effort even when facing superior opposition. The fight against Salem was competitive, with both men exchanging punches throughout the contest, but Carver was clearly absorbing significant punishment as the rounds progressed and the accumulation of blows began to take their toll on his body and brain. The fight went the distance, with Salem winning a decision, but immediately after the final bell, it became clear that something was seriously wrong with Carver. He had absorbed an accumulation of heavy blows throughout the fight, and the cumulative damage had caused severe brain trauma. Despite immediate medical attention and emergency intervention, Carver's condition deteriorated rapidly, and he passed away shortly after the fight ended. While there are limited specific comments about Carver's death, general threads in the boxing community tied it to discussions about accumulated brain damage and the dangers of taking too many punches over the course of a career. His death served as another reminder of how dangerous boxing can be, even in fights that don't appear particularly brutal from the outside. The tragedy highlighted the importance of properly monitoring fighters and recognizing when someone has taken too much punishment. Bathavian, Scotland, 2001. Bathavian, Scotland, a 31-year-old super bantamweight, entered the ring on March 30, 2001 to face George Jones in what was scheduled to be a routine fight at the County Coliseum in El Paso, Texas. Scotland was an experienced fighter who had competed professionally for several years, and there was nothing particularly unusual about this matchup that would have suggested the tragedy that was about to unfold. The fight itself was competitive, with both men giving their all in pursuit of victory. However, during the bout, Scotland absorbed significant punishment, and the cumulative effect of the blows he received would prove fatal. He developed brain swelling as a result of the trauma sustained in the ring. What made his death particularly tragic was the delayed nature of his passing, which occurred after the bout had concluded, highlighting once again how insidious and unpredictable brain injuries can be in boxing. Users noted the emotional impact on opponents, linking Scotland's death to broader safety reforms in the sport. His passing added to the growing calls for better post-fight monitoring and medical protocols, as his case demonstrated that fighters can appear fine immediately after a bout, but still be in grave danger from injuries sustained during the fight. The tragedy served as another wake-up call for the boxing community about the need for comprehensive medical oversight. Roman Simakov, 2011. Roman Simakov was a 27-year-old Russian light middleweight with dreams of becoming a world champion and bringing glory to his country. On December 5, 2011, he stepped into the ring in Yekaterinburg, Russia, to face Sergey Kovalev, who would go on to become one of the most feared light heavyweight champions in the world. Simakov was the underdog in this fight, but he showed tremendous courage and determination, refusing to back down against the much more powerful Kovalev. The fight was one-sided, with Kovalev landing heavy shots throughout the contest that had the crowd growing increasingly concerned for Simakov's safety. Despite absorbing tremendous punishment, Simakov kept pressing forward, showing the heart of a true warrior. However, the accumulation of punishment proved too much, and Simakov suffered severe brain injuries during the bout. He was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, he passed away 3 days later from the injuries sustained in the ring. Sergey Kovalev was devastated by what had happened. In an extraordinary show of respect and remorse, Kovalev donated his prize money from the fight to Simakov's family and dedicated subsequent fights to his memory. Online commentaries praised Kovalev's tributes and acknowledged that he had done nothing wrong. He was simply the better fighter on that night. The tragedy highlighted the emotional toll that such incidents take on the surviving fighters, who must live with the knowledge that they were involved in someone's death, even though they were just doing their job. While Simakov's 2011 death in Russia captured international attention, boxing's dangers had been claiming lives across Latin America as well, including a 2008 tragedy in Mexico. Daniel Aguilón, 2008. Daniel Aguilón was a Mexican featherweight who stepped into the ring on September 13, 2008 to face Alejandro Sanabria in Mazatlan, Mexico. Aguilón was fighting on his home soil, hoping to impress the local fans and advance his career with a strong performance. The fight was competitive, with both men exchanging punches and neither able to establish clear dominance in the early rounds. However, during the bout, Aguilón absorbed severe punishment that resulted in devastating head trauma. The injuries proved fatal, and tragically, Aguilón passed away as a result of the damage sustained in the ring. His death was covered in articles like "Unfortunate Deaths in the Ring" on Bleacher Report, which documented the tragic toll that boxing can take on its participants. There were sparse direct comments about Aguilón's specific case, but his death was tied to discussions about Mexican boxing's dehydration issues and the extreme weight cuts that fighters often undergo to compete in lower weight classes. His family reportedly had suspicions about the setup of the fight, suggesting there may have been matchmaking issues that put their loved one in unnecessary danger. The tragedy served as another reminder of the importance of fair matchmaking and proper medical oversight in boxing. The concerns about Mexican boxing's safety protocols highlighted by Aguilón's death were shared across Latin America, as demonstrated by a 2002 tragedy in Panama. Pedro Alcazar, 2002. Pedro Alcazar was a 19-year-old Panamanian bantamweight who faced Fernando Montiel on June 1, 2002, in a fight that would end in tragedy. Alcazar was young and full of potential, dreaming of following in the footsteps of Panama's rich boxing tradition and becoming a world champion himself. The fight against the more experienced Montiel was supposed to be a learning experience, a chance to test himself against a higher level of competition. What made Alcazar's death particularly eerie and disturbing was the delayed symptoms that appeared the day after the fight. Immediately after the bout, Alcazar appeared to be fine and passed his post-fight medical examination, giving no indication that anything was seriously wrong. However, the next day, he suddenly collapsed and was rushed to the hospital where doctors discovered he had suffered severe brain trauma. Despite emergency medical intervention, Alcazar could not be saved. Online users discussed the disturbing nature of his delayed collapse, with some expressing outrage at bystanders who filmed rather than helped. The tragedy highlighted the limitations of immediate post-fight medical examinations and the insidious nature of brain injuries that can manifest hours or even days after a fight appears to have concluded safely. His death raised serious questions about whether current medical protocols are sufficient to detect life-threatening injuries before fighters are cleared to leave the venue. Next up, Choi Yo-sam, 2008. Choi Yo-sam was a South Korean flyweight who stepped into the ring on January 12, 2008, to face Heriberto Ruiz in what would become one of the most tragically ironic moments in boxing history. Choi was fighting for glory and the chance to advance his career, and he gave everything he had in pursuit of victory. The fight was competitive and hard-fought, with both men exchanging punches throughout the contest. In what should have been a moment of triumph, Choi won the fight, but collapsed immediately after his victory was announced. The irony of collapsing after winning was not lost on observers, and it sparked serious discussions about safety protocols in South Korean boxing. Choi had suffered severe brain damage during the bout, and despite being rushed to the hospital and receiving emergency treatment, he could not be saved. The tragedy was particularly heartbreaking because Choi had achieved his goal of winning the fight, yet he would never get to enjoy his victory or the opportunities that should have come with it. The irony of winning then collapsing was noted by users online, highlighting how victory means nothing when it comes at the cost of a fighter's life. His death sparked important conversations in South Korea about whether enough was being done to protect fighters and whether the sport's risks were worth the rewards. While Choi's death in 2008 was shocking for its timing, we must travel back decades earlier to explore boxing's darker history. beginning with a 1947 tragedy that haunted one of the sport's greatest legends. Jimmy Doyle, 1947. Jimmy Doyle was a 22-year-old welterweight contender who faced the legendary Sugar Ray Robinson on June 24, 1947 in Cleveland, Ohio. Doyle was a skilled fighter with a bright future ahead of him, but he was stepping up in class to face one of the greatest fighters who ever lived. What made this fight particularly haunting was that Robinson had experienced a premonition dream before the fight in which he saw himself killing Doyle in the ring. Robinson was so disturbed by this dream that he actually considered pulling out of the fight, but a priest convinced him that it was just a nightmare and he should proceed. The fight itself was brutal and one-sided, with Robinson's superior skills and power proving too much for Doyle to handle. In the 8th round, Robinson landed a devastating left hook that sent Doyle crashing to the canvas, where he struck his head on the floor with terrible force. He never regained consciousness and was rushed to St. Vincent Charity Hospital, where doctors discovered he had suffered a severe brain injury. Despite emergency surgery, Jimmy Doyle died 17 hours after the fight ended. Sugar Ray Robinson was devastated by what had happened, especially given his premonition dream. In an extraordinary gesture of remorse and compassion, Robinson donated his purses from his next several fights to Doyle's family, helping to support them financially in the wake of their loss. When asked at the inquest if he had intended to get Doyle in trouble, Robinson gave his famous reply, "Mister, it's my business to get him in trouble." The tragedy haunted Robinson for the rest of his career, serving as a constant reminder of the dangerous nature of the sport he dominated. That wraps up this video. For more interesting videos like this, check out the cards on your screen.